Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, novel editor. I hope you're all doing really well. Lately, we've been talking a lot about structure, and that's sort of more technical and dense. So I thought that we would change gears today and talk about something that's a little bit more about writers' lifestyles or psychology, a little bit more about how to actually accomplish the writing process. If you are interested in this type of video and you want more like this, let me know. I do have other topics that I could cover that are sort of along these lines. For example, we could talk about procrastination or how to actually improve your writing, things like that. So let me know if you are interested in more lifestyle type videos. But today we are going to talk about what to do when you can't finish a novel or when you frequently switch stories. And this could apply to scripts or short stories as well, not just novelists, but I think because novels are so big, maybe this problem is a little bit more common for novelists than for other types of creative writers. So before I get into the video, I do want to mention that I'm not at all saying that it's inherently bad to give up on a project. Sometimes it makes sense to pause a project temporarily, to put it on the back burner, or to even give up on the project entirely if it's really not working or if you just don't want to work on it anymore for whatever reason. Also, I'm not criticizing people who work on multiple projects at once. Some writers do like to have 2 or 3 projects going, and that's completely fine if that works for you. I'm only talking about situations where writers want to be able to stick with the project for longer, but for whatever reason, they're just not able to stay with one project and they just sort of keep hopping along to other projects. Most commonly, I would say people tend to get stuck around 20 to 50 pages. So if you have this problem, usually you'll be somewhere in that range, and then you might have 5, 10, 15 novels that you've gotten 20 to 50 pages into. So if that sounds like you and that's causing you distress and you want to be able to finish a project, today I'm going to talk about the common reasons why I see writers fall into this trap and also how you can get out of it. So the first common reason for this problem is that the writer believes that their success is more dependent on the project itself than on their skill set. So this is the type of writer who might think that if they could just find the right character or find the right story, then everything would fall into place, and the challenges that they face with their stories just would disappear. So if they could just find this great idea, this perfect idea, they wouldn't be hitting the roadblocks that they've been hitting. And so then they're tempted to keep changing to a different project, thinking this project feels more promising. And of course, most projects in their early phases are very promising because you had an initial spark of inspiration, or maybe you had a series of scenes that seemed really cool and really exciting. The problem is typically you will run into the same problems with every project. Whether or not you necessarily realize that or not, it may manifest slightly differently depending on the project. But most of the time, because the same person is writing each project, the same problems are going to crop up over and over. For example, you might have a tendency to write very passive characters, maybe very shy characters who have a hard time getting into the action or engaging with the conflict. Because that may be part of who you are or part of what interests you about writing, you may find that same problem presenting over and over and over in every manuscript, even when you think the project seems more promising or more exciting from the get-go. So the solution to this problem really is just knowing that the skill set is more important than the premise. Execution, I'm sure you have heard many times that execution is far more important than the premise. We can talk about many movies and books and stories of all kinds that have basically the same exact premise. It's how it's executed that makes the biggest difference. That really comes down to skill set. So characterization, organization of the scenes, scene structure, story structure, whether you do it on an intuitive level or you do it on with a more technical plotting, planning level. It's the skill set that's going to help you to execute your idea in the way that you want. It's not the idea itself. So if you find yourself hopping around project to project, it's possible that this is the mindset that you have, that you're thinking, next time I won't run into these problems because the idea will be better. And that's probably, unfortunately, just not going to be the case. The next common problem is that the writer gets bored easily. So this isn't really anything to feel bad about. It's really not unusual. I think that it happens to all writers, but I do think some writers may struggle more in getting past that boredom phase with an idea where it's not new and shiny and exciting anymore. And they might feel tempted to just sort of hop along to a different project because it looks newer and more exciting and more fun, and they feel more inspired towards a different project. So if that sounds like you, I totally understand. It's so hard to stick with a big project for a long time. But the writers that I have seen who have been able to push past that boredom phase have typically reignited their excitement about that idea. They've been able to reconnect with it, to feel what they liked about it, or to re-engage with what inspired them towards that idea to begin with. I would recommend really focusing on what inspires you as a person, what excites you about writing, or what do you enjoy about this idea, or what drew you to it to begin with. You could use playlists of music or mood boards or rereading key scenes that are really important, or that you really like, or that are really exciting. Anything that you can do to help yourself stay invested and stay excited about the idea. With that said, it may be the case that you just have to push through and just force yourself to get through that boredom phase. Every project will hit that phase, and I know it can feel like, well, this new idea is so fun and exciting, and I'm not going to get bored with this new idea, but typically every project, every writer with every project is going to hit a phase where it's just not exciting anymore. It's just not really fun anymore, and you just have to push through to try to get to the end. The other thing to keep in mind, and really this is for all of the potential reasons that you might struggle to finish a project, when you change projects quickly or too rapidly, you don't learn the advanced level skills that you need in order to make something that you're really happy with and really excited by and proud of. So there's a chance that you're getting bored because your skill set isn't where it needs to be to create a book that's of the quality that you want it to be. And because you're bored, you move on to another project. You continue to not learn how to do those advanced level editing skills or writing skills, or how to push past walls, how to push past writer's block. And a lot of that is learning what works for you specifically and what works for you personally or psychologically. It's not even necessarily just knowing what the skills are, but how you can apply them in a way that works for you. So keep in mind that even though you might be bored and you might think another idea sounds more interesting and exciting, you are sort of limiting yourself and limiting your growth as a writer if you're jumping projects so fast that you're not learning those advanced level skills. The next common problem is that the writer either romanticizes pantsing or winging it, or sort of just banging out the first draft without any sort of preparation, or they view plotting or planning as sort of creatively inauthentic, so not as true or truly creative as someone who's sort of winging it. A lot of writers want to sort of sit with a glass of wine and just create their masterpiece, but unfortunately, very, very few writers are able to actually create publishable work doing that. And very few published writers are genuinely sitting down with no preparation whatsoever and just writing their draft straight through. Very few writers work like that because it's very, very difficult, and you'd have to have a very good sense of intuition to be able to successfully write a book without any preparation. So if this sounds like you, and especially if you tend to struggle with not knowing what should happen next, so maybe you spend a lot of time looking at the blank page, sort of thinking, oh, what should the next scene be? What should the next plot point be? I highly recommend that you put more focus on plotting or planning. This tends to be the best way to actually see tangible improvements in your writing, and to see a rough draft that's better than maybe what you've created before. Because something to keep in mind is if you wing it and you create this rough draft, and this rough draft is really, really sloppy and really, really messy, and maybe you change your idea for some of the concepts halfway through, so maybe the characterization changed, or maybe you decided against a subplot, or you added a subplot, you have so much messiness to fix that sometimes it can feel easier. It might actually be easier to just switch to a new project, to just abandon this project, because you have such a messy, rough draft. Of course, you can overcome any rough draft. You could rewrite the whole story from scratch. You could go from that to a planning or plotting phase and then write a new draft. There are lots of options, but I think for many writers, when you see a draft that's so messy and so rough, it can really bring you down. It can make you feel bad about your own skills. It can make you think that you're not good enough, and it can make you maybe stop writing altogether for a period of time, and then you get an inspiration and you'll move on to a different project and rinse and repeat forever. And so if what you really want is to create a publishable book and you want to finish something, you want to finish a project, I highly recommend that you figure out a preparation and planning phase that works for you. So the last common problem that I want to go over is the writer who feels like editing will just take too long. So if there's one thing that I know about writers, is that most of them wish they were already published and published yesterday or 10 years ago. And if this is your mindset and you have a sense of urgency that you want to be published by a certain time, and this is very, very common. I talk to writers all the time who may not want to do edits on a book or might not want to address a specific area. Even say they know an area of the book is weak, they know this subplot, it could be a lot better, or, this character could be completely reworked, it's not really working that well. But they don't want to do the work because they want to be published by the end of the year, or they want to be published before the birth of their child, or they want to be published by age 30 or age 40 or age 50. Often writers put time constraints on themselves, or they want to have been published by a certain time. And I totally understand. I totally get wanting to be published and wanting to already be where you're going. You want to already be an author and not just an aspiring writer. But the editing process is really, really important. It's more important than the writing process for most people, because for most people, they're going to spend more time on editing to create a publishable book, to create something that's at a high enough level to entice an agent or a publisher. Most people are going to spend more time on editing than on writing. But I think a lot of people can be in this mindset that it's going to take too long. I might as well just start over with another book because it would take so long to edit this one. But then they end up in the exact same situation again with the next book. Editing just takes a long time, and it's going to take a lot longer the first time and maybe the second time. After a while, you'll get a sense of what works for you. You'll get some techniques, and you'll learn how to expedite the process and move things along more quickly. But skipping editing altogether, it's going to cost you more time in the long run. It's going to be a lot harder to develop a new idea and write a new draft and then edit that draft than it would be to just stick with one. Editing can actually make you a better writer. It can make the rough draft better in the future, because you will start to pick up on, oh, you know what, I don't really describe things in enough detail, or maybe I describe things in too much detail. Maybe I add a bunch of scenes that don't really advance the plot, and it ends up making the pacing really slow, and then I have all these scenes I have to chop up and combine. Being aware of your weaknesses, I think the best way to accomplish that is through editing, because that's where you can really look at where you're failing or where you're not as strong as you want to be, and then you can start to work on making improvements. So I highly recommend that you stick with a project. Of course, if there's a reason that you don't want to stay with this project and you know that it's not going to work, it's sort of dead on arrival, there's nothing wrong with abandoning a project if that's really the choice that you want to make. I would just recommend that you not abandon a project to start a new one because you think editing is going to take too long, because you're probably going to find the same thing is true the next time you have a rough draft, that you're going to feel like the editing is going to take way too long. It's sort of just part of the process, and editing will end someday, even though sometimes it feels like it never will, but one day you will wake up and you will be done. So what can you do to actually stick with a project? The first thing that I would recommend is that you figure out your writer type. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you probably already have seen the writer type videos, but if not, I highly recommend that you watch my video series on the 4 types of writers. If you're using a method that does not work for you, you're going to have a much harder time sticking with the project, and a much more likely chance that you're going to end up with a rough draft that is way too rough to want to deal with, and that's really, really overwhelming. So that's where I would start, is figure out your writer type. You might have to experiment a little bit to figure out what methods work for you, but that should help tremendously with finishing projects and feeling capable of finishing projects. The next thing is sort of obvious, which is just don't let yourself hop projects. I know that's easier said than done. You get these ideas for new projects, it's way more exciting, or you're really bored and tired of working on the project you're working on now. I highly recommend that you try your best to push through. even when it can be really hard or really boring. Again, using methods to keep yourself excited about the project, like playlists of songs and mood boards, image boards, things like that, can really help. I also recommend, if you're the type who has anxiety about losing ideas, so maybe you have an idea for a new project, you're really excited and enthusiastic about it, you don't want to lose that idea, have somewhere where you jot those ideas down, record them somewhere. You could even be brainstorming a new idea at the same time that you're working on whatever book you're already working on. Just try to make sure that the book you're writing is your main focus. So if you come up with ideas, jot them down into the document for your next book, but try to stick with your focus being on the current book. So don't let yourself go down a rabbit hole. Don't choose to purposefully brainstorm. But if ideas come to you, write them down, put them in there. Again, you could be the type of writer who writes two things at once, in which case maybe you do intentionally brainstorm on a different idea, sort of take a break from the project you're working on now. But try to keep your enthusiasm in that project that you're working on. Try to not let it seep into a different project. I know it's easier said than done. Some of this just has to come down to sort of self-discipline and sort of just forcing yourself to stick with the project. I know that can be not the easiest thing to accomplish, but it will pay off. I promise it will pay off. If you stick with the project long enough, you will learn so many skills and you will become so much better as a result. I also recommend that you keep in mind that every project is challenging. Every novel will have a time where it's boring and it's not exciting to work on, and no matter what the story is, you will almost definitely reach a point with it where you are bored, or where you want to work on something else, or where you're really frustrated, or you're worn out or exhausted. It's a normal part of the process, and I think it can be helpful to try to not let that give you anxiety, to try to not let that make you feel like there must be something wrong with this idea because I'm just not moving very fast with it. It must be dead on arrival because when I try to fix it, I'm really struggling to get it to be any better. Or I'm tweaking these things and I'm not seeing big improvements yet. Try to believe in your ability to get there eventually. I know that can be really, really hard to do. And that sort of leads into my last tip, which is build your confidence as a writer. Because when you believe that you can finish something, you believe that you have the skills, when you look at those rough scenes or a whole book that's rough, you won't sit there thinking, why can't I do better? Or I can't do better. Or, if this is the best I can do, I might as well just move on to something else or quit writing altogether. When you believe that you can take a rough scene to a polished scene, it helps so much with your ability to stick with the project because you'll believe that you can someday make that project what you want it to be. For that reason, I would recommend something that maybe is a little bit against the grain of what other people would recommend, but I think it can be very helpful to polish a couple of scenes to absolute perfection so that when you look at that scene, you're like, wow, when I first wrote this, it was rough and now it's great and it's exactly what I want it to be. It hits the voice and the tone of the novel that I'm shooting for. The characterization is great. The scene structure is great. And reading that and knowing that and seeing that you can do that makes it a lot easier to stick with the editing process for the whole rest of the book. So you can play around with that idea, see if it works for you or not. I think it may be better to do the first scene or the first couple scenes. I think those tend to be really fun scenes to polish. They tend to be it's sort of what inspired the writer to create the story in the first place. So, but it doesn't have to be the first scene, but whatever scene you want. I think spending time to polish a couple of scenes can really, really build up your confidence, and it can help you to see that you really can do it and you really do have the skills necessary. And if you don't, and you find that, you try to polish this and you're like, wow, I really don't know how to make my dialogue sound natural. I really don't know how to make scenes feel exciting, or whatever the case may be, you then have a specific tangible skill set that you can then step away from the book to try to improve. So you can go do research or watch videos or read books or whatever, analyze other writers, and you can figure out, okay, what am I not doing right? Why is this writer, why is their dialogue strong, but I think my dialogue is weak? So when you can try to make those issues more tangible, you can then work on your skill set and build your skills. But when you leave things for later or you abandon the rough draft entirely, I think it can be very hard to believe in yourself, and it can be very overwhelming when you go to try to do the editing phase and you're moving all around, tweaking all around the book, but then you end up not really ever feeling like you're improving or not really feeling like it's getting where you want it to go. So, in conclusion, I think if you can make a scene that's solid from your book, that's the right tone, vibe, really captures the characters and the genre and all of that, you will either figure out what problems you're running into and how you can fix them, which will help you with the writing or editing process wherever you're at with the book. Or you will just realize that you do have the skills necessary already, and that will really help to build up your confidence and to know that you can do it and that you will get there eventually, and that this book is worth sticking with and not jumping to another project. So I really hope that you found this video helpful. It's a little bit different from the types of videos I've been doing recently. Let me know in the comments if you like this type of video or if you have suggestions for a different type of video. If you want to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon, and thank you so much to my Patreon subscribers. You guys have been super, super, super helpful for me to put more focus on the videos. I will be back with another video. I'm not 100% sure about what it will be, but I will be back with another video soon. And in the meantime, happy writing.